Now, the only option left is for either Ukraine to bend or Russia bends. It's either Ukraine bends or Russia bends. Question is, who is it going to be? Is it going to be Russia bending or is it going to be Ukraine bending? I am very delighted to have you on the third episode. And like we talked about in the last video, we said that today we'll be discussing, the conflict proper, the Russia-Ukrainian crisis. All right. And if you observed, I have a glass of water here with me because this one is not a regular gist. All right. So we can't talk about this crisis if we do not have, a knowledge of Ukraine's political structure. Now, Ukraine has had many presidents over time, all right, but we're just going to look at two presidents, and because they are their tenure is very relevant to what we are going to discuss, to the build up of the conflict and everything. So I'd like us to talk about you know two presidents. First, the present president of Ukraine, and what's his name? Zelensky. Oh gosh, I do not like pronouncing this Ukrainian names. It's like we're speaking in tongues. Victor Yanukovych. Oh my god. And Zelensky, that's the present president of Ukraine. Now, in our last video, I told you that, because of the division in the Ukrainian society, it brought about, these two classes of people. Some people were pro-Russian and others were, pro-West. Western supporters and then Russian supporters. And it didn't just like end with the people. They also had that division in the political structure. We had Ukrainian political parties that were pro-Russian. We also had political parties in Ukraine that were pro-West. Those pro-Russian political parties, they loved the old Soviet culture. They were anti-West. They didn't want to have anything to do with the West and their ideologies and their democracy. So they were less liberal, right, in nature. Now, this Victor that was president from 2010, he was a pro-Russian president. Do you understand? And he became the president of Ukraine in 2010. He was the people's president. People loved him, liked him. He was quite popular, but not for long, because this likeness was what short-lived. And that's because during his reign he did a lot of things that didn't really go well with the Ukrainian population, and they criticized him and all of that. And one of the things that he did that actually got on the nerves of Ukrainians was the deal that he signed in 2010 when he became president. I think that was like the next month he became president, in April. He signed a deal with the Russian government, and this deal required that while Russia would give Ukraine a 30% cut in natural gas. All right, because already, if you know Russia very well, Russia is one of the biggest suppliers of natural gas to Europe, not just Europe, but to Ukraine as well. All right, so Russia was like, I'm gonna give you guys a 30% cut in the price of natural gas, and of course, like there is no free meal in international relations. All right, so nothing goes for nothing. You give me and I give you. All right. So when Russia proposed, we're going to give you guys a 30% cut in natural gas supply, and you guys are going to do us a favor too. You're going to allow our naval fleet in the Black Sea extend it for another 2.5 decades. That's for about 25 years. All right. Now, for another 25 years. Man, that's like the scriptural inscription of Esau giving up his birthright for just a pottage. Like, it's like giving Russia the control of Crimea for what? For 30% gas. Ukrainians were like, no, 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 we can't do that. And so this met serious opposition. It didn't go well with the Ukrainian population, and they did not like it one bit. They opposed the policy. And on one hand, it wasn't just them that opposed the policy. On the other hand, United States were also in one side, monitoring this thing. They didn't like this policy either. They actually frowned at it, the US and the EU. Now, this is the part where it gets even more interesting, all right? US had always had interest in Ukraine. Now, in 1991, right, when Ukraine broke away from the Soviet Union, US quickly recognized Ukraine as an independent nation and sent its support. They helped Russia and Ukraine reach a consensus on the elimination of the Soviet nuclear weapon system in Ukraine, and of course ensured the safety of Ukrainian lives. Also, during the Ukraine nuclear waste crisis, US helped, clear the mess, clear the meltdown and everything. And guy, it cost a lot of money. It cost a lot of money, yeah. But yeah, US did that, and of course, in addition to these other countries that made donations for Ukraine. To further buttress this friendship, Ukraine was added to the Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1994 by the US. All right. Few years after that, it was when Ukraine NATO partnership started gaining momentum. Ukraine sent troops in 2003 to support U.S. invasion of Iraq, and Russia was somewhere frowning at this, seemingly building friendship. They didn't like it. They didn't like how U.S. and the European Union was meddling in the affairs of Ukraine. They didn't like it one bit. In 2010, this president further did something that angered the people. They were like, "Is this guy trying to run the federation like Russia or what?" They didn't like it. They started to protest. To salvage the situation, what he did was plan to sign European Union Association Agreement. Right? Yeah, because these people are already pro-West. I mean, the Ukrainian people, most Ukrainian people. So when he signed this agreement, they kind of liked it. They loved it. They were like, okay, yeah, he's finally coming back to his senses, because they saw it as a means to welcome civilization and then democracy, to experience Western lifestyle and all of that. So the people, they loved it, they hyped the policy, and it's more like Victor got what he wanted, all right, and then he got the people's love back. They were happy, and normally what a leader would do is, when you're running a policy that the people like, you hype it, man. Take it to the media, blow it out of proportion if you have to. And that's exactly what Victor did. And he talked about this policy. It was everywhere on the news, and the people were really happy for it. 2013, Victor went back on his word. He suspended signing the policy. That was like the straw that broke the camel's back. The people went hysterical, they didn't like it, and they reacted. It even led to a certain movement that was aimed at removing the president. Because the society was already divided into two. When he brought about that policy, there were some people that weren't okay with it, because it was more like a Western, aligning Ukraine to the West. And those people that were pro-Russian, especially the eastern part of Ukraine, they weren't comfortable with it. While most people wanted it, but this eastern part of Ukraine, they didn't want it. And so it was like opposition everywhere. It led to, civil unrest. People were protesting, destroying government properties and all of that. It even got bad that, security personnel had to, resort to arms to quell the conflict and probably bring Ukraine back to its normal destiny. But it didn't happen anyway, until Victor was forced to, sign the agreement. He signed the agreement, and he eventually fled to Russia. Meanwhile, while this was going on, Russia utilized the opportunity to invade Crimea. Russia took over Crimea. They conducted a referendum, and the people voted for the Russian Federation. So actually the people wanted it. Most people, the vote was in favor of, the Russian Federation, and that is how Crimea became independent state of Crimea. Russia defended itself by saying, well, we didn't impose anything on anybody. We conducted a referendum, and the people voted what they wanted. It is called the principle of self-determination of the people, and it's also the people's right. That's how Russia defended herself, and of course, US refused to acknowledge that referendum. And if you remember, I told you in our last video that this Donbas region, that's the eastern part of Ukraine, that most of them were pro-Russians, and a lot of them, groups had taken up arms, and they were fighting for different interests. Some of them were of the opinion they wanted to be independent, and so there was this conflict between the Ukrainian government and this armed group, separatist group. So Ukraine wanted, number one, a complete ceasefire. Number two, that Russia withdraws completely her weaponry. And number three, government control, that is Ukraine's control of the conflicting region, that is the Donbas region. Russia wanted an autonomy of the Donbas region. Russia wanted an autonomy, like grant these people the right to govern themselves. They say they don't want you, they don't want to be part of Ukraine. Why are you forcing them to be part of Ukraine? Let them go. Let them go. Let them govern themselves. Grant them autonomy. Now, I'm guessing the reason Russia wanted this was because, Donbass, they are basically pro-Russian. They are Russian-speaking people. And so if they had autonomy, it was going to be very easy for Russia to, probably, relate with these people, deal with these people, political interest and economic interest and otherwise. So granting autonomy to the Donbass region would very much favor Russia. All right, and Ukraine knew this, of course, and they didn't want it. And I can understand why. Donbass is the industrial powerhouse of Ukraine. All right, I mean, it's getting hotter in here. I think I need an AC. Donbass is the industrial powerhouse of Ukraine. Donbass produces about 1/3 of the world's wheat production. So if Ukraine lets Donbass go, it is definitely going to have an implication on the country. That is why Ukraine can't just do that. It can't just give in to that demand. It is difficult for Ukraine to do that. In this new 10 measures policy, it gave the following provisions. Number one, that Ukraine should grant autonomy to Donbass. There was a condition attached to it, right? Ukraine wanted a complete ceasefire and withdrawal of the Russian troop from the region. If Ukraine had accepted this Russia's demand, like Ukraine is saying, we'll grant those people, we'll conduct an election for those people if they want autonomy or not. But first, we need Russians to get away from those borders so that we can take full control of this region and conduct the elections under the Ukrainian laws. That was the condition that was attached to that before Ukraine could agree to grant autonomy to those people. All right. But Russia said, nah, that can't happen, bro. You conduct the elections first before anything else. Now, I'd like us to understand the situation that Ukraine is in right now. All right, take a seat. First, Ukraine cannot go on a full-blown war with Russia. It is not in a position to do that. It will certainly be needing help from NATO. All right, this is where NATO now comes into play. Ukraine is in no good position to wage full-blown war with Russia. It definitely needs NATO's help. All right, to be able to do that. Number two, Ukraine cannot conduct local elections right now because Russia has made it clear that no, autonomy first before anything else. The moment you grant autonomy to these people, we are completely going to cease fire and we will withdraw our troops out of Ukraine ASAP. But you know what? Ukraine cannot accept that. They can't. It's very difficult for Ukraine to do that. If it agrees to this term, it means that, the Donbass region, if Ukraine grants the autonomy, will literally be, under Russian control. Do you get? Because they're already pro-Russian, all right? And there will definitely be a good relationship between this Donbass region when they become autonomous. Good relationship with them and Russia. And Ukraine does not. It also implies that Ukraine would have to grant amnesty to, people who participated in anti-nationalistic movements in Donbass region. Worse still, it fears that Donbass region, when granted independence, might, cause conflict, internal conflict in Ukraine. So you see, Ukraine cannot bend to Russia's terms, and Russia can't seem to bend to Ukraine's terms. But if Ukraine must confront Russia, it needs NATO's help. In 2019, NATO deployed troops to eastern Poland, the Baltic, and Lithuania to reassure these guys, like, I got you, we got you, right? To reassure these guys following Russia's annexation of the Crimea Peninsula. Now, despite all this, the question is, why has NATO not helped Ukraine now yet? If Ukraine is in dire need of NATO's help, and the US is going all over the place reassuring people of, security assistance, question is, why has it denied Ukraine membership? Why? Have you thought about it? Because number one, Ukraine's general public are totally in support of NATO. Do you understand? In fact, they are more than willing to accept anything that NATO and the US throws at Ukraine. So why have they not received membership? Now, I think that's a question NATO and the European Union need to answer, really. Because to be honest, it doesn't make sense. That's making sense. By the way, do not believe everything you hear from the press. Sometimes they only project their interest. They want you to hear what they want you to hear. They want you to react the way that they want you to react. And sometimes they want to gain your sympathy. That's it. They don't give you the full gist. They don't give you the full gist. Because let's think about it really. If EU and NATO cared so much about Ukraine as they portray, what they would have done is grant Ukraine membership. Grant Ukraine EU membership, NATO membership ASAP, and deploy troops to Ukrainian borders. But they're not doing that. Not yet. I mean, it's been days since the war started, and all we get from the US is pray for Ukraine, pray for this. Hello? Does that make sense? All we get is sanctions upon sanctions upon sanctions upon sanctions. Sanctions are not enough to deal with this issue. They are not enough because sanctions are not helping. At least not at the moment. But you know what I think? NATO will not send that troop. They may not respond. It's not even about Russia's warning that NATO should not interfere. That is not the point. NATO will not interfere because if NATO grants membership to Ukraine, it allows Ukrainians, to innocently migrate to other parts of Europe. The EU does not want that. The EU does not want that yet. Now, for NATO membership, there is very little support for NATO to grant, membership to Ukraine. Now, recently we read that Ukrainian president has, made an appeal, signed an application for membership, for NATO membership, right? But this is what I think. They are getting little support of Ukraine joining NATO because, number one, Russia is already in Ukraine. Do you get? I mean, NATO will deploy troops to Russian borders. NATO will deploy troops to Russian borders. And when they do this, it will metamorphose to a full-blown war. And this is, US that just got out from Afghanistan. How many months ago? US just got out of Afghanistan how many months ago? After a 20 whole year long war. So apparently, is US ready for that? Now, apart from that, even what purpose will it give this time to justify it? To justify getting involved in this? To save the Ukrainians from Russians? Does it? Besides, what Russia is asking for is to conduct a local election, right? Which is democracy. Which is democracy that, the US are always advocating for. So fighting Russians for asking for this would mean US is literally fighting what it is supposed to be preaching, what it has been propagating to other countries all these years. Even if US is going to send troops, what is the reason that it is going to give for sending troops? To protect the Ukrainians? Why didn't it do it 8 years ago? Why didn't it do it 8 years ago? Because it is not now that this conflict started. This has been on for 8 solid years. Why didn't US do it then? That is why NATO is being very sluggish in granting membership to Ukraine. Now, the only option left is for either Ukraine to bend or Russia bends. It's either Ukraine bends or Russia bends. Question is, who is it going to be? Is it going to be Russia bending or is it going to be Ukraine bending? Because apparently it's not easy for both countries. If Ukraine agrees to bend, it means that it has understood what it has to deal with subsequently. Probably a higher chance of internal conflict and civil unrest. And Russia cannot bend because it will continue to do everything it can to protect its national security interest. Do you understand? Especially as NATO and the West continues to support Ukraine. All right, so it's difficult for those people. I don't know. That's why the conflict is prolonging. No one wants to bend for the other. This is definitely not a case of Russia undermining Ukraine's sovereignty as the West paints it. No, it is not. In fact, Russia has no intention or had no intention of invading Ukraine because if it did, it would have done it long ago. It would have done it long ago. Russia held on to the Donbas region for 8 good years. Why? Because it was its own way of keeping off the European Union and NATO from interfering in Ukraine. And if you notice, it is only US that is blowing the trumpet. Only US is making noise. Only US is loud. The other European nations, because they understand the implication of this, they are taking it low. They are being very, very, very careful in dealing with this issue. Someone said Russia is to the world what the Niger Delta is to Nigeria. And I think that's correct. And that will bring us to the end of this episode. In the next episode, we will be discussing why Russia invaded Ukraine. Why did Russia, invade Ukraine? That's what we'll be talking about in the next video. You don't want to miss this. 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 The gist is actually getting hotter. So please, if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, you might just want to do that right now, okay? Turn on your notification. You don't want to miss out subsequent videos. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate your being here. I appreciate your presence. Please leave this video a thumbs up if you really enjoyed it and let me know what you think under the comment section. I'd like to interact with you under the comment section. Until we meet again, thank you so much for watching. Bye for now. Mwah.